Thank you to Carol, Jackie, Wayne, and Ricky. I want to also thank you all for coming and open the floor up for questions to those of you who have them. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I think that one thing that was missing from all of your talks was a compelling financial argument, economic argument for why this is important. I mean, I was not too long ago looking at the annual disability statistics compendium. Working age individuals with disabilities currently collect over $200 billion a year in Social Security and Medicaid. That's if they had been better integrated into the mainstream society. These are people that could be working and getting health benefits themselves through their employer, and that's kind of a long-term economic thing, and we don't always think long-term in terms of our legislation, but what are the short-term costs, I guess, of integrating schools to be able to have all students being supported in mainstream settings?
One of the things, this credits work, I can talk loud. One of the things I thought I was trying to bring up at least, and from the voice of the school administrators and the district administrators, is that when you are looking at everything in a very bifurcated system with all these silos, you're duplicating a lot of efforts, you're leaving people out, you're not making the most of your money, using what you're spending for all students and getting the maximum benefit. I think that also translates, the retrofitting part translates into needing all these para-educators. I mean, there's a great deal of money being spent on people to support kids, which also I think in some ways makes it harder when they get out to be as self-sufficient. But you need that because you have a curriculum and materials that only work for this many kids in the classroom, and then you need these other bodies in there to be doing it on the spot instead of coming from the central office, making sure the materials and the curriculum are designed to work better so that you don't have to duplicate that effort. And there's also more fidelity with the curriculum too, instead of everybody doing it their own little way. So there are a lot of different, I know Carol can talk more about transportation, there's all kinds of costs.
Yeah, I don't think we have great cost data, but one of the things that we've seen in our transitioning or working systemically with schools is that if you're changing the way you do business, that costs money. So it's just like if you manufactured an automobile in one way and you're going to bring in new equipment to manufacture it in something else, that investment in the change is what costs. On the other side, you should have decreased costs. But the change process, because your professional development, materials modifications, etc., that change process is what's costly.
I think the Bruce example is a really compelling one in terms of his post-school outcomes. He will be a part of the service. He will need services, and he will probably need intensive services because he can't tell us before it gets too far gone, if you will. And there are some barriers to delivering services to him. You know, you can make an iPad, a communication system, for about $900 compared to durable medical equipment that costs $14,000. So there has to be some changes in the way a lot of different sectors do business, but the costs that you would realize on the other end are, you make a really compelling point, and I think he's a classic example of that.
And I think I've heard from local school districts about just even the transportation costs of transporting kids to other schools that are not their school, and just a separate special education whole transportation system, whereas my kid who's included goes on his regular bus without aid, doesn't cost him anything more, he's just another kid at the bus stop, as opposed to being one of 3 kids or 4 kids on a special bus that's going somewhere else in the school system.
Are there other questions? Wayne, did you have an answer?
Just to say that the issue of benefit cost studies those are hard to come by because they require longitudinal data. You can look at cost changes. For example, we look at the cost of kids being educated in special county operated segregated centers versus being included, if you will, in the SAM process. The cost there is huge. I mean, it's the special center costs are probably 4 times the costs of educating the child in the general education with supports setting in the regular schools. So returning those kids from those expensive programs, DC's going through that right now, moving kids out of their big special center programs, very expensive, you know, back into regular schools. The issue of benefit requires downstream. We have to know what happens to kids after they graduate and a few years into the community, and it's hard to get a study funded that will allow us to capture those long-range studies. The other cost issue that we're looking at is the number of kids who are identified for special education. When we started in Ravenswood, it was 17% back in 2003. The latest data I saw is 9%. So there's, you know, this integrating systems model ultimately results in fewer kids actually being identified, and the reason is that the schools are finding kids' instructional matches could be met from a variety of resources. They don't necessarily have to come from special education, and especially when those special ed supports are integrated, like speech therapy and so on and so forth. So those are, I think you're getting at the point. We need those data, but they're pretty hard to come by.
Sue?
And just as a note, on the VR side, the courts have pushed on ROI discussions, really pushing at capturing all of the costs, but seldom do we capture all of the benefits. For example, the benefit to the family, the benefit the mother doesn't have to leave work to go pick up her kid because the school kicked her out again. That's a huge benefit that she gets to keep the job. So I
Curtis?
think it's important to have balance.
Curtis, did you have something?
Wayne, I was intrigued by your connectedness to community schools. Community schools movement hasn't been particularly inclusive. And I wonder if you could say a little more, elaborate a little more on the real integrated connectedness there.
You know, this one's really complicated by virtue of the school reform efforts that have been implemented nationwide for about the past 15 years. To my way of thinking, if you have a neighborhood school that's connected to its community, to the businesses and to the support systems like the community mental health system and whatever you've got, the police department, Parks and Rec, that they benefit each other. Because often the kids coming through the school would then move up and become employees in the businesses and maybe service providers ultimately in the service systems and so forth. But now we have, you know, charter schools, we have schools of choice, and vouchered private school placements, and so the relationship between, you know, the question of what is the community of the school and the school has become more complicated. But nevertheless, I think that if we look at those schools which have a significant percentage of the kids attending coming from the general catchment area of the neighborhood of the school, and we have that connectedness between the school and the businesses and the support systems in the community, and this, we look at this separate from the families. There's kind of two connection issues here. We're about, I think, 6 months away from being able to do a statistical analysis of whether or not that connection is taking those kids that are members of that community, does it have some demonstrable impact on outcomes associated with their education? And right now, I'm thinking it will. It's going to turn out to be a pretty powerful, I don't know if that's answering the question you were asking, but it's the hard part for us is, in DC in particular, is finding schools that are really taking the kids from their community. Because there's schools that are, you know, they're being brought in for a variety of reasons from all over the place. Particularly kids with IEPs. They're coming out of special center programs and being placed in schools according to different criteria than it's their neighborhood school.
Eric?
One of the perceptions that I feel like there's always a barrier of perception and expectation for children with disabilities. It sounds like there's a lot of great examples here. How did you guys break through that sort of barrier of either the low expectations or the perception that a child with a disability should only go to a segregated room? I mean, it seems like you guys broke through that, but it seems like we run into that in a lot of different situations.
You have two answers. One is data, and second is parent-to-parent connections. Those are from my experience, the two most powerful variables in overcoming low expectations. Parents are really, parents that move into Ravenswood from elsewhere are really nervous about having their kids go to schools where there's no special classes, because that's what they're used to. And they think they're maybe being denied services and supports. And so the school leadership team will show that parent, give them a tour of the school. They're very user-friendly now for families. They'll start off by showing the data. Here's what kids, with IEPs, here's how they're doing. And we also give them data from control schools where it's business as usual in other demographically similar areas of the Bay Area, and they can compare. They're flatline and going down in most schools in the Bay Area that are comparable to Ravenswood. Ravenswood's going up, and that's a subgroup of special ed that we work with those families, and then we have parents who will meet with the new parent and say, when my kid did, here's what happened, and so on and so forth. The net result of that is for parents to begin to say, wow, there's more possibilities here for my child than I had ever believed. And then after that, it's let's see how the child does.
I think something I've seen that's very interesting is, once you give these kids a chance, first of all, they show what they can do, and they kind of win over the hearts and minds. But what I found pretty quickly often happens is that the parents of the kids who are gifted, they're paying attention, and they're saying, well, you've got this teacher who's really creative and flexible and is helping work things out for your kid. That's what I need for my kid. I need, because it's the same issue really. You're on the margins in different ways, and so I need a teacher like that. So, people would start coming up to me like, who are you trying to get for next year? I want my kid in your kid's class, because they really saw that teacher, that same set of skills that we need to teach kids with disabilities in the regular class. We also need to teach gifted students and a lot of other students. And then students who were struggling but did not have disabilities also saw the benefit, because they saw a class where I had one mother say to me, my child has struggled reading and would never read out loud and really was not learning to read until they were in class with your son, because they knew that class was an environment where he would not be made fun of, because they weren't making fun of your son, they weren't going to make fun of him. And so he was able to, for the first time, to really reach out and get the help he needed, and he didn't have a disability, and so she saw the real benefit to him. So to see that in these classes you have skills that are not just working for that kid with a disability, they're working for all kids.
Any other questions? Well, great. We'll hang around for a little while if you want to touch base with any of the panelists, and thank you, Sue.
Are you going to post the PowerPoints in your place?
Yes, they'll be on our website within the next day or so. And we'll also have a YouTube video. Did you have a question, Mary? No. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming in. We'll be here.